Hello, everyone. My name is Caroline Nicolay, and I run Pario Gallico, a UK-based company offering experiential archaeology and living history displays. My research usually focuses on Iron Age wall paintings, especially on the pigments used at the time, say about 800 BCE to 100 BCE for me, so in Britain and Northwestern Europe. Now, I have suddenly switched from paints to construction techniques, simply because from a paint and experiment point of view, you need a wall, and to make a good wall, you need to know how to do that. So I'm retraining as a maintenance and repairs on historic building trainee. For the moment, when visiting open-air museums, we might see quite a lot of reconstructed houses, and they use natural, traditional materials, which are now used by sustainable architects and natural builders in a very modern way as an answer to the climate change issue. As a very simple point, the idea is to replace cement and concrete, which is partly made with cement, by natural, local, and more sustainable materials, because the worldwide global production of cement a few years ago amounted to 8% of the global man-made carbon, so CO2 emissions. So in the whole building industry in the world, and for me in the UK, if cement and concrete could be replaced by more sustainable materials, then it would have a huge impact on climate change and hopefully on the sustainability of the environment. So the idea is that open-air museums, using the same traditional skills, techniques, and materials, have a huge potential to bring together sustainable builders and archaeologists. Now, there are very, very interesting differences between sustainable and natural materials. All natural materials are not sustainable, so I'll very quickly present such things. Then I would like mainly to talk about what could natural builders, professional natural builders, and open-air museums bring to each other. And as a last point, I will give some examples of sites, people, and projects that you might want to follow or maybe get in touch with to know more about all this. A natural material is usually a traditional materials, again, used in replica houses in open-air museums. It does not mean that they are all sustainable, which came to me as a surprise very recently, a few years ago. Sand, for example, is used throughout the world in many, many things, even say solar panels because of silicate. It's the most consumed commodity on the planet after water. It's gigantic, and the extraction of sand as a non-renewable resource actually is quite harmful to both the environment and vastly the local communities. So we use sand quite a lot in lime products, cement and concrete, but for us also in daub. So wattle and daub walls, usually daub is made of clay, sand, and fibers, quite often chopped up straw. That's what we mainly work with. It doesn't have to be sand. It could be subsoils, local ones, but quite often modern builders, even traditional historic craftspeople, use sand. So that could be changed a little bit. Wood, chopping a tree down, usually produces, in essence, more carbon than leaving it to live in the forest. There's a whole wide questions about this, but in short, the places where I worked at and the project I worked on use mainly coppiced wood, actually quite essentially coppiced wood, which has a way lesser impact on the environment and produces less CO2. Straw, you might have heard about straw bale buildings. If you did not, it's not a traditional technique, it's very new, but it's very, very sustainable and works tremendously well. So please do have a look at that. The rest of the straw for us is usually used chopped up in daub, but also as thatch and so on and so forth. It's a fantastic, very sustainable material. It's simply a byproduct of the food industry. So that is something potentially to mention and to look at. Last but not least, earth. to me, is the most sustainable, the most beautiful type of material. Not really renewable, but reusable infinitely. You can make daub, you can make cob, you can make oven walls, destroy them, remix them with water, and straight away apply them again. It doesn't end until the house burns down or the clay is cooked or baked, like pottery, for example. It is durable. It regulates humidity naturally. It's insulated from sound. It's non-toxic, non-allergenic. It's fireproof. It can even be used as insulation. But it suffers from a great image problem. It usually is nowadays associated with a dirty environment, a dirty house, a mud hut, if you like, which is very a derogatory term for something that can be quite beautiful. It's very associated with peasantry, peasant houses, being unrefined, a bit backwards techniques, and so on and so forth. It is not the case, it hasn't been until the last 150 years only, at least in the UK, things changed and people didn't want to build with earth anymore. Now, that's where open air museums could have a huge impact. They could show in their reconstructed traditional historical houses how beautifully made earth walls and earth plasters look. That's a very good advertising and a scene to be visible for the natural building environment, but it is also a way to present archaeology as the best we can. Just to show, this is on the left an earth plasters in an office environment by Rebirth, so Becky Little in Scotland, and a painted daub wall with earth plaster and earth mineral paints in Samara Archaeological Park in France. On both sides, there's about 3,000 years between these two examples, if you like. But on both sides, the earth plaster is beautifully made, no cracks, colored. It can be whitewashed and then painted, no problem. But in essence, they are using the same materials and the same very professional techniques. It doesn't need to be made by a professional, but these skills in open air museum have to be taught by a professional, and for our staff, volunteers or helpers to be able to make daub in such a lovely way, we have probably to upskill quite a lot of us. This is what I meant about the archaeology. We actually have archaeological evidence and pieces of earthen plasters and walls. On the left, Venungen in Germany, on the right, Vix in the east of France, both around the 5th century BCE. You can clearly see that the walls are smooth, not cracked, broken but not cracked, whitened, and then painted. On the right-hand side, there are the different layers of the plaster. So it's not just a layer of daub on the wattle and then some paint. It is a layer of daub, a render, a finish, and then the paint. Sometimes 2 layers of renders. So it's more complex and better finished than we usually think. But this is what we see in the majority of open air museums. And I work personally at the Ancient Technology Centre in Dorset, UK. So the round house that you see there is, I can talk about it. The thatch is beautifully made. The structure is very nice. The door, excellent. But the daub walls, the earthen walls, have been made quite a long time ago by school groups, by school children. And very unfortunately, as good a community involvement as this project was, it hasn't been supervised and pushed to the extent that the walls should be. To reflect the actual archaeology, the walls should be very well made, very smooth, whitened and painted in some ways. When visitors in any site see something, you can explain to them, you can tell them, you can show them many different things. They will always remember and come back to what they saw. And that to me is the big issue in many places at the moment, is that we don't have the skill in many open air museums to present history and archaeology well enough to reflect the skill that our ancestors or forebears or people before us had and actually show in archaeological remains. So the inside wall, absolutely painted, whitened, no problem. But again, the daub is very, very roughly made, and it gives always this, again, idea of not very refined, not very well made, very fairly dirty environment, etc., that we want to get rid of in any case. On the right-hand side, the painted wall is from Butser Ancient Farm, and you can see there, smooth, whitened, painted, no problem. Still some cracks, and I have been taught and told many, many times in many different places, if the daub cracks, it's perfectly normal. It is not. If you ask, if you look, if you work with any professional natural builder, earth builder, mud mason, ask around, visit places, daub is not meant to crack. If it does, it's because the mix is not quite right. So you need to adjust it, maybe with a bit more aggregate, sand, earth, straw, and so on and so forth. I cannot recommend enough for anybody working or helping in an open-air museum to discuss these kind of issues and to try to get professional training or people, professional natural builders, to come in and have a look at the site. This is what the collaboration would be about. This is how it could look like, and it does look like in some places. On the top, Samara Archaeological Park, beautiful walls. Inside, on the lower part, this is Butser Ancient Farm in the UK, and the house has been cleaned and repainted very recently. Now, I personally would prefer knowing that somebody on their walls used lime washes or lime plasters, which do not exist in the Iron Age. There really is a technology arriving with the Roman culture, with the Roman invasion. Now, I'm talking about the British Isles and Northwestern Europe. You could use lime as long as, to me, it shows cleanliness, good skills, colors, and so on and so forth, because the visitor might not know what you have used, but that could be a discussion, though they will remember how it looked like. Of course, the best would be to use absolutely accurate paintings and run some experiments and so on. But that's something to discuss for every single site. Now, the natural building industry and sustainable architecture industry could very mainly bring in techniques, bring in training, bring in upskilling. That's where the collaboration should really start, in my opinion. They can also bring professional insight on architectural questions, for example. Again, in Open Air Museum, it is very rare that we have professional in architecture working alongside or with a background in archaeology. It can happen, but it's very rare. Don't hesitate to ask somebody who professionally works in such topics. They can also help in new health and safety requirements because they are very hard to follow. And if you work in natural, traditional buildings and with these materials, they might have a lot of insight to offer you. They can also help you build some very modern, sustainable buildings. That would be both a good advertising for the sustainable architecture scene and quite a lovely thing to have on an open-air museum, working in modern buildings using the same natural, traditional, local materials at some other replica building you might have on site. That's about 3,000 years old. I quite like this idea myself. The input of Open Air Museum could be gigantic, just the sheer space and opportunities for experimenting that we can provide. Space, of course, but opportunities. For example, making a milk or a blood floor with chalk powder. It's very traditional where I live for the moment in the south of England, still nowadays. There are some archaeological examples of protein floors. It could be a thing. In any cases, if you talk to professional natural builders, they don't usually have the opportunity to make these floors just because clients are not interested. So there's an opportunity there, again, to collaborate. Archaeologists or archaeological finds could bring solutions to modern questions that the answers of have been long forgotten or we don't think about. For example, turf construction. Daniel Postma in Scotland is, to me, the reference about turf buildings in the UK. But that is not something very common, though if you go to Iceland, a lot of historic buildings, a lot of open air museums are just turf buildings. So there are connections there to make between modern and ancient. It's also, again, a good advertising for something very well made with natural materials that potentially some visitors could really like and think that they might try in their modern homes, which would lead us towards a more sustainable building environment. These are just example photos of interiors. So some modern ones on the bottom left there, designed and made by Becky Little, Rebirth, in Scotland. Then you have Samara Archaeological Park on both sides. Again, there's the outside of the Iron Age house and a beautiful, again, earth, chalk, plasters and paints. And the top one is an experiment currently today and the next few days at Chalk Valley History Festival with insulation, with daub on an Iron Age roundhouse. There are quite a lot of projects, people and places who have started bringing archaeology and natural building together. Becky Little, Rebirth in Scotland, Daniel Postma for ArchaeoBuild, again in Scotland. I cannot recommend enough to have a look at Ebuki or SBUK. They are excellent, excellent website and people to contact. There's a list on the right-hand side there of various sites and projects that are currently going on and very interesting, especially the grassroots hutting project at Comic Crofts. And that's run by Daniel Postma. It's basically this little roundhouse on the side. So based on archaeological finds in the local area, reconstructing something using traditional techniques and natural materials to be a modern temporary building, and then measures will be taken to see how well it works, basically. And I'm very much looking forward to both this and the new Scottish Crannoch Centre potentially becoming the most sustainable museum in the UK, potentially in Europe. So all of that to follow. And these are just two comparisons between a very modern and a very ancient, so Iron Age and 21st century little buildings using the same techniques in completely different places. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to ask. Thank you.